Let's begin, yes. Fantastic. Okay. Let's get started. So, we are on the Gemara. The last thing we did, we're going to go back one little bit in order to understand what we're talking about and not jump in without any idea what we're talking about. Okay, so we left off on 3b2 ve'amar. Okay, ve'amar Reb Shimon ben Pazi. Right, that was the last bit that we said. Please only answer amen if you're listening to this live. Baruch atah Adonai, l'nei melech haolam, she'akol nהיה baro. Amen.
I know what you mean by yes. It's a different.
Yeah, I love it.
Ooh. Oh, that hurt. That was a lot of bubbles. Whew. Okay. Let's go. So the Gemara on 3b2 is following up on a very simple concept, okay? What was the concept? The concept is, you can sit at the end over here also if you want. The concept is that when we said that you can't plant on Shemitah, you can't plant and you can't harvest. So we already explained this idea that the Gemara said that extends to a time prior to the actual seventh year, because when a person is doing something which only benefits the crops of the next year, so by definition, that is plowing for the year of Shemitah. Okay, so the Gemara said we brought that whole idea until what time? Bet Hillel, Bet Shammai. It's roughly around the same time. Atzeret, Shavuot. The Gemara wound up answering at the end that what's it called? It's going to be too confusing, so we're going to pick 2 times Atzeret and Shavuot for a wheat field and for a field of an orchard. Rabbi Shimon ben Pazi came along and said, Rabbi Gamliel and his Beit Din nimnu al shnei perakim halalu. They considered this extra time period, this excess period, right? Ubitilum, and they nullified it, rendering a person able to plant and to plow all the way up, only up until Rosh Hashanah. Once Rosh Hashanah comes in, new year, once it's a new year, you're already in the 7th year. Is that so far so clear? Mm-hmm. Okay. Now the Gemara is going to ask on this, how did such a thing happen? How were they able to do that? Amalei Reb Zera Rabbi Yavau. Rabbi Zera said to Rabbi Yavau, "V'amalei Reish Lakish Rabbi Yochanan." Either Rabbi Zera asked the question of Rabbi Yavau, or Reish Lakish asked the question of Rabbi Yochanan. They said, "Rabbi Gamliel bet dino hechi matzu mevatle takanata de bet Shammai bet Hillel." I don't understand. How could Rabbi Gamliel, who was the son of Rabbi Yehuda Anasi, who comes at the end of the temple, the second temple period, that's where he lives. Okay, Bet Hillel and Bet Shammai are the Zugot. That's way, way earlier. It's in the beginning of the second temple. So Bet Shammai and Bet Hillel say that you have to add on to the 7th year to a time prior to the 7th year. Comes along Rabbi Gamliel and his Bet Din, and they're like, nope, you don't have to do that. How were they unable to do that? Didn't we learn in the Mishnah? A Bet Din can't undo the psak, the ruling of a Bet Din of its friend, that came before it, unless the second Bet Din is greater in both wisdom and in numbers. In other words, let's say I had a Bet Din that has 71 or 72, and the other Bet Din was 23, so it's more numbers, but they're not smarter than them. Okay, not enough, even if they have more. What happens if they're much smarter than them, but there's less of them? Also no good. Both conditions need to be fulfilled. They have to be bigger in Chokhmah and in Minyan. Rabban Gamliel's Bet Din was not greater than Bet Hillel, Bet Shammai. Generations, almost 300 plus years prior. Okay? So it would need to be something that would be self-evident. Okay? Now, says the Gemara, after this question, so whoever it was, either Reb Zera to Ravau or Reish Lakish to Rabbi Yochanan, they asked him the question, and the teacher who got the question, Ishtomem kisha'ah chada. The Gemara over here is using a bit of a language that we're borrowing from another place, where Daniel was put on the spot to answer the dream of Belshazzar. What was the case? If you remember, we've discussed this before. The king of Persia at the time had a dream, and his dream was that there was a hand writing on the wall, and he saw what it was writing. He didn't understand what it was, and that's literally where the expression comes from. The writings on the wall, from that pasuk in Daniel. Okay, he said to him, "This means that you're going to die," and da da da. And he said, "What are you talking about?" And that night, assassins came and they killed him. Okay, so the Navi was able to, but when Daniel was asked to interpret the dream, he was taken aback. So the Gemara is using that expression. Ishtomem kisha'achada. For a moment, he was taken aback by the power of that question. How could they possibly have undone the idea of the extension of Shemitah to a little area, to a cushion prior to the year, if the people that instituted it, Bet Shammai, Bet Hillel, were far greater than them? Amor, he answered, Kachit nu benehem. Bet Shammai and Bet Hillel, when they made this new gezerah, they instituted it and they said, Kol harotzeh levatel, yavo v'yivatel. They included in it the get out of jail free card, the break clause, that if some future generation would want to break it, they'd be allowed to break it. So it's a fascinating answer that he's answering. It sounds like Bet Shammai and Bet Hillel was saying, listen, this is what we think you should be doing. We're not going to rule for everybody. We're not instituting it a hard pass that everyone has to follow it. But if you take my advice, im chacham libcha beni, this is what you should do. Anyway, Rabban Gamliel comes along later, and using the stipulation that they had obviously put into their gezerah, they took advantage of it and they nullified the pre-Shemitah prohibition. Clear?
What are the conditions to nullify it?
Explain.
They just have to stand up and say we hereby nullify it?
Yeah. They didn't stipulate. They just said anyone that if at a later point they're not going to want to do this, they don't have to do this.
So don't you have people doing both?
It could have been no. It was an all or nothing scenario. Either it was going to be uprooted by a future Beit Din for all the Jewish people, or it was going to be enforced.
How do we know that by the wording?
How do we know that from which wording?
Because they said that it could be nullified at any point. Right?
We don't have that. Rabbi Yochanan or Rabbi Abahu are telling us that about this takana of Bet Shammai Bet Hillel.
I see.
Okay? Now, says the Gemara. Okay, so far everyone clear where we are? We have Bet Shammai Bet Hillel extending the time, but Rabbi Gamliel undoing it. And the question is, how could he do that? The answer is, even though they're bigger, they're older, they put in a get out of jail free card, and Rabbi Gamliel and his Bet Din used it. Okay? Now, I personally have another little bit of a item here at this point.
And that ended up to be Rosh Hashanah.
Sorry?
Ended up to be the Rosh Hashanah rule.
We're going back to Rosh Hashanah, which is what you'd think if you weren't extending the law of Shemitah. Torah says seventh year, only seventh year, okay? Now, hold on one second. I also have a little bit in the back of my mind that maybe what's going on over here is something a little bit, which is maybe not as straightforward as you might have thought. So, like, what do I mean by that? Bet Hillel, Bet Shammai are in a period of time where the Jewish people are in their land. There's no galut, right? They're right? When does Rabban Gamliel live? In the time of the destruction of the temple. Chaos. The people are all over the place. Maybe the people at that point, after being beaten and killed and exiled, maybe Rabban Gamliel felt, listen, whatever's not an absolute must, we're going to roll back. So maybe that's what's going on over here. Bet Hillel, Bet Shammai were, in a more, it was in a little bit more stable time. Rabban Gamliel, exactly. So maybe that's what they meant when they said, look, if everything's good, go for it. But look, if you have to work then because you're dying, okay, fine. Let's continue. The Gemara continues. I don't understand. The Gemara says, did hui? You want to tell me that this is a gezerah of Bet Shammai, Bet Hillel, and then it was undone because they allowed you to undo it when they first made the gezerah? Halakha leMoshe miSinai. This law is actually rooted in a halakha leMoshe miSinai. Now, these words, halakha leMoshe miSinai, appear all over Shas. What does it mean, halakha leMoshe miSinai? On Mount Sinai, God, when He gave Moshe the Torah, He gave him the Torah in two parts. There was going to be a written part of the Torah, which is the 5 books of Moses, okay? He didn't give it to him at that point, because they were still living it. Moshe Rabbeinu did not have at Mount Sinai a piece of paper that said, and then God said to Moses, talk to the rock, and then Moses struck the rock, and because of that, he's not getting into the land of Israel, and then he goes to the rock, he's like, I read about this, right? That's not what was going on. He didn't give him the complete book, 5 books of Torah on Mount Sinai. Couldn't be. They hadn't lived it yet. All the mistakes that they would make, they had a book that said the mistakes before. It's kind of like that scene from Spaceballs. Anyone remember that? When he rents the movie, right? Either way, so the idea, right, that's not what's going on over here. The concept was he gave him, according to most opinions, the Torah up until that point, and then as they went through the experience in the desert, God said, this is what you should include, this is how you should word it, and the Torah was, so to speak, being unfurled, yet in real time, okay? By the word of God. Now that we understand that that's the written Torah, what was the oral Torah? God also taught Moshe Rabbeinu all the Mishnah, all the Gemara. Now, not in the form of the Gemara and Mishnah. He didn't sit there with a Gemara, Art Scroll, Rashi, Tosafot, right? He learned all the rules and ideas that were expressed, that come out of the Torah. All the things that the rabbis learned, all the oral Torah was given by God to Moshe. So let me just give you an example, because this is important to understand. The Torah says that you have to eat only animals that were killed properly with shechita. In the Torah it says, like I told you. Open up the Torah, you will not find how to slaughter an animal. So a person that doesn't want to follow anything but the written Torah, it's inherently flawed. The Torah tells you to put on tefillin. Nowhere does it tell you what tefillin are. The Siddukim were like literalists. So it says you should put the tefillin ben enecha. So they put it between their eyes. Right? That's how they did it. It says lo tibaru esh b'choma. You can't have fire on Shabbat. So they ate cold food.
But that was the Alpeh part.
They were literal.
The Alpeh, they got the...
They felt that there was no Torah Sheba'al Peh. They felt only Torah Shebechtav. Only that was written down. So Halakha Moshe Misinai are certain laws that were given to Moshe at Mount Sinai, right? And those are the laws. There's certain laws that are instituted that we talk about throughout Shas. Okay. Gemara says, what is the Halakha Moshe Misinai over here? Ta'amar Reb Asi Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Reb Asi in the name of Rabbi Yochanan said, Mishum Rabbi Nechunya. From Rabbi Nechunya, Ish Bik'at Bet Chortan. Rabbi Nechunya, who lived in the valley of Bet Chortan. Esther Nitiot, Arava, Venisuchamayim. These 3 things. The 10 saplings, okay? Arava, the willow branch, okay? And finally, Nisuchamayim, the pourings of the water. Halakha Moshe Misinai. What are these 3 things? So I'm just going to give them to you very quickly. Asara Nitiot means that there was a teaching that said that if you have 10 saplings, what's a sapling?
Baby.
A young tree, a baby tree. 10 saplings in a field, Betzah, which is 2,500 square feet, okay? So 10 saplings of density, young trees, in a 2,500 square foot field, okay? You're allowed to plow up until Rosh Hashanah of the 7th year. Why? We already learned this. If you have a young tree, certain things need more water.
Is that the minimum? That's the minimum for
the
qualifying?
the minimum density. If you have 11, obviously.
Right. So
If you have
the
9,
qualification.
qualification. Exactly. So the law is, if you have 10 saplings, you're allowed to plow up until Rosh Hashanah. Okay?
Entire field or
That whole fields
At
were
least that amount.
fields were given in a minimal amount. So like we have today, we have an acre, So the size was a betzah. So that size field with 10 sapling trees in it, you could plow the field, because if you don't plow the field, those young trees, they'll die. Okay? If the trees are not saplings, or there's less than that amount of per density in the field, okay, then it's not a problem. What's the reason? Saplings, they need a lot of water. So if the ground is not primed, if there's not enough, then they steal from each other. That's why it matters how many there are and the proximity that they are one to another.
we get the loss.
So Halakha Moshe Mishinai says, 10 saplings in the size of a field this size, nun al nun, 50 by 50, which is 2,500 square feet, then the halakha is you're allowed to plow until Rosh Hashanah. Second halacha, Moshe Sinai, is arava. Machloket, exactly what that means. In the Beit HaMikdash, there was a certain thing that they did with the arava. One opinion is that they would carry the arava, go around the Mizbeach. One opinion is that they would put them on the sides of the Mizbeach, and they would go around. But whatever the approach was, that the fact that there should be in the temple a service with just the willow branch, not with the lulav, okay? Just that. That's the second halakha Moshe Sinai, okay? The existence of the ceremony. The third thing is also a ceremony, that on the holiday of Shavuot, okay? On the holiday of Sukkot, what would they do? They would pour the water on the Mizbech. That was called Nisuch HaMayim. So by the way, there's a whole prayer that we say on the last day of Sukkot. We talk about how we ask Hashem, Mashiv Aruch B'Nida Geshem. And we keep saying, Ba'avu Al Timna Mayim, 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 Mayim. What are we asking for? We're asking for the rains. But one of the things that we mention is the procedure that we do, which is Nisuch HaMayim. Normally with Korbanot, they would pour wine, but on Sukkot only, they would pour water. Okay? So this also is Halakha Moshe Sinai. Does not appear in the Torah. It's not learned from the Torah. It was a law that was taught directly to Moshe at Mount Sinai. So far, so good? Okay. Now, if that's the case, we have 3 laws. One of those laws governed the fact that 10 saplings in a field of this size, you're allowed to plow until Rosh Hashanah. What does that tell you? Wait, what does that tell you first?
You're allowed to go.
No.
Say it again.
10 saplings in a field of this size or more, right? You're allowed to plow until Rosh Hashanah.
Sukkot, though.
What does that tell you?
Can't do anything else.
Obviously, if you don't have 10 saplings, or if the 10 saplings are in more than the size of Betzah, then you're not allowed to plow. So the halakha Moshe Sinai already told us that the laws of Shemitah extend past Rosh Hashanah. Right? In the inverse. If you're telling me that you're allowed to have it for this exception, the exception tells you the rule, doesn't it?
Why past Rosh Hashanah?
No, up until Rosh Hashanah.
Oh, okay.
What I mean is that for saplings, up until. If it's not saplings, if it's older, or if it's less than 10, then what would happen? Then you would not be allowed to plow the field earlier. Meaning that the buffer zone is already built into a halakha Moshe Sinai. This didn't come from Bet Shammai, Bet Hillel. So how could you, Rabbi Gamliel, undo it based on the fact that they did it and they gave you a get out of jail free card? This is from Sinai already. You got the bomb question.
Higher.
It's because Hebrew National. They answered to a higher authority. Okay, fine. I always love that the NK, and they're telling you how Osha can. Okay, fine. It's like the pig with the thing. Okay, fine. The Gemara says, Amar Rabbi Yitzchak. Rabbi Yitzchak says, Ki Gemiri Hilcheta Shiloshim Yom Lefnei Rosh Hashanah. You're absolutely right. The halakha Moshe Sinai must tell you.
So how do you know it's the 3? It's from Moshe and Sinai, oral. How would they know that there was an oral? Those 3 were from Sinai. If they were oral, they weren't written down.
No, he's telling. But all of the oral laws were handed down, rabbi to student. So one of the rabbis says, this is in a Mishnah. The Mishnah tells you this, right?
So they didn't see that?
Did he halakha Moshe Sinai? The Amar in the name of Moed Kattan, he said he taught this halakha that it was halakha Moshe Sinai, passed down all the way to him. Okay, now that we have this, so we have bomb question. Answers the Gemara. Oh, all you have over here is that if you have 10 saplings and you're allowed to plow, telling you that if you don't have 10 saplings, or if the trees are older, or if you don't have that ratio, that you can't. But it doesn't say from when. It doesn't say from when you can't. Ki Gemiri Hilchata Shiloshim Yom Lefnei Rosh Hashanah. This was talking about halakha Moshe Sinai is 30 days. So 30 days before Rosh Hashanah is what? Elul. Rosh Chodesh Elul, Rosh Chodesh Tishrei. 1 month. Right before Shemitah. V'atu hani, and comes along Bet Shammai Bet Hillel, takun mi Pesach v'atzeret. Shabuot is already before the summer. Pesach is in the spring. So Bet Shammai and Bet Hillel were talking about a much larger buffer zone than the buffer zone of 30 days. So he answers beautifully. The halakha Moshe Sinai is only 30 days. That Rabban Gamliel couldn't argue with. But what was he arguing with? He was arguing on the 6 months, on the Atzeret, on the Pesach of a wheat field and of the trees. Ve'atnu biditu, and on that they stipulated, and on that I would say and Rabban Gamliel came along and argued with that period of time. So we have the answer of Rabbi Yitzchak so far. We good? Everyone understands?
They defined the before Rosh
The rabbis
Hashanah.
ought to make it stricter. Is that what they're doing in essence?
Yes.
They're making it stricter on us, where the Torah Shabbat Pesach says you go all the way to Rosh Hashanah, and the rabbis saying no, you have to stop by Pesach.
No, but they're
Is that what it
defining.
is?
They're making it strict.
They're defining the Rosh Hashanah time before. What does before mean? 30 days.
Not 30. We're telling you.
Halacha Moshe Misinai says 30 days before.
We're telling you,
Definition.
6
They're
months.
saying no, it's not 6 months.
Whatever. I'm saying before.
It's before that. Yeah. If you want to know exactly what it is, it's before the summer. So you're talking about 4 months.
That's
right?
when they're saying it begins from.
Yeah, March instead of September, for Pesach. Well, sorry, not March. April instead of September, and April, June, mid-June is usually Shabuot. Okay, so but not September, or 1 month before. So far so good. Rabbi Yitzchak basically answers that what did Rabban Gamliel and his Bet Din do? They said the Pesach Shabuot thing, we're not doing that because Bet Shammai, Bet Hillel built in a trapdoor and they let us get out of it. But on the 30 days before, Rabban Gamliel has nothing he could do about that. Okay? So that's how Rabbi Yitzchak understands the situation.
They defined it. 30 days.
They defined the halacha to Moshe as 30 days. And Bet Shammai, Bet Hillel as going further beyond.
For the 10 saplings, can you add context that like if you're in the desert where you don't get so much water, then maybe if you have like 2 or 3 and they really need it?
So you're asking a very good question. The problem is we just learned the Gemara that says Rabbi Shimon Omer, Imken, if so, you gave the Torah to be defined by every guy in every location and everything in every field. So it's not, we can't do that. We can't make the laws like that. However, in Chol HaMoed, we actually did do that. Like in other words, in a situation, right? In a situation where we
made it easier.
where the Isur is the Davar Aved. So let me just differentiate. When the Isur is Davar Aved on Chol HaMoed, so the Torah says you're allowed to do the work if it's going to result in a loss. That by definition is dependent on the actual Mitziyut, on the reality on the ground. Okay? But when it comes to Shemitah, the Torah says you can't do this. Halacha Moshe Misinai says 30 days before. Those were not, let's give a little bit, take a little bit. It was not, they gave a size, okay? Now, comes the Gemara. Vehani, now the Gemara says, what are you talking, are you telling me that these 30 days, halacha Moshe Misinai, kirayininu, it's already a pasuk. The Tanan, the pasuk says, we read this pasuk already, becharishu bekatzir tishbot, in the plowing and in the harvesting, tishbot, you should rest. Rabbi Akiva says, en tzarich lomar charish v'katzir sheshvi'it. Now, I need to give you a little bit of a heads up here, okay? Because what we're going to do is going to be a little bit confusing unless you know this. This pasuk, charish katzir tishbot, which we already saw a few times, we said that it tells you it's always asur to do the plowing, even if there's no whipping, right? There's no lashes, because it says there's a positive mitzvah, b'charish katzir tishbot. That pasuk is not so simple. Let me give you the beginning of the pasuk. Look on the outside column, okay? You see the first one? See that? Sheshet yamim?
Yeah.
Sheshet yamim ta'avod, 6 days you should work. What's that talking about? Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, okay? Ubayom HaShabi'i, Tishbot. And on 7th day, what's that? Shabbat, Tishbot, you should rest. Becharish ubekatzir Tishbot. In the plowing and in the harvesting, you should rest. What's that talking about?
The years. The Shemitah year is the 7th year, the 6th one.
I'm just saying, if I read that pasuk, I would not think that that's talking about Shemitah. The whole pasuk is about Shabbat and 6 days. The problem is,
It says B'yom HaShavi'i.
it says B'yom HaShavi'i, yeah, but it says B'yom HaShavi'i Tishbot.
Right.
Now it says after, on the 7th day you should rest. It says Charish ubekatzir Tishbot. Now, is that the only thing you have to rest on Shabbat? Plowing and harvesting? No, a million things. And not only in the field. You can't write, you can't paint, you can't dye, you can't light a fire, you can't put out a fire, you can't build an item, you can't take an item down, you can't sew something, you can't rip something. A million things. 39 avot melachot. So why did the pasuk come to tell you specifically this? Says Rabbi Akiva says, these words, Becharish Bekatzir Tishbot, is telling you that there are times, not on Shabbat, on Shemitah, which is also called Shabbat, okay? Is what's it called? It is forbidden. Now, if Charishu Bekatzir over here is talking about Shemitah, because I don't need it to talk about Shabbat, the Gemara Rabbi Akiva says, you know what else I don't need it to tell me about? Shemitah. Because the Pesukim say all over the place that you can't harvest and you can't do the field in Shemitah. So what's it coming to tell me? Becharish ubekatzir tishbot, and tzarich lomar charish vekatzir shel shevi'it. She'areh kvar ne'emar, because it already says, sadecha lo tizra, you can't plant, and you can't karmecha lo tizmor, you can't prune. And I know all the things. Sfiach tzircha lo te'aket, the next words in the pasuk. It tells you you can't do any of these things. Ela, so why is there an extra pasuk telling you not to plow, not to harvest on Shemitah? Ela charish shel erev shvi'it. It must be coming to include something we don't already know. That's taking us one step back, that you can't plow pre-Shemitah. Which, by the way, we already said we kind of get.
We said that before.
Right, but we got it from here. Okay?
Pre-Shemitah, but 30 days before Rosh Hashanah is pre-Shemitah also. So Shavuot pre-Shemitah.
Yes, now the Gemara is saying, at least minimally, we have a pasuk here. Why are you telling me halacha Moshe Misinai, which is without a pasuk, right? Just complete pure oral law. I have a pasuk here, Rabbi Akiva. Okay, the Gemara says, "El charish shel erev shvi'it." This is talking about plowing before the seventh year. Shenichnas le'shvi'it, that the plowing of before helps you only for the seventh year. Remember we talked about that? If you could do plowing that you could answer is really for the sixth year, is for the benefit of the stuff that's there, that's not plowing for the seventh year. But when you're plowing for the seventh year, before Shemitah, that's no good. Now the harvesting on the Shemitah year, I don't need to tell you. I have a pasuk that tells it to you already. So what harvesting must I be talking about? Post the seventh year. So the plowing before and the harvesting after. So let's say I'm now 2 days after Rosh Hashanah year 8. I have fruit that is ripe on the vine, okay, on the tree. I want to go get this fruit. It's 1 day after Shemitah. But the whole of this, it grew during Shemitah. Is this Shemitah fruit or not? The answer is, it is. But only from this Derashah. Since it grew then, and it says, Charish Katzir, you can't have, and I don't need it to tell me on the seventh year, this must be coming to tell me plowing and harvesting. Plowing is pre-crop, harvesting is post-crop. It must be coming to tell me pre-seventh year and post-seventh year. That's Rabbi Akiva's opinion.
What was the original pasuk that we had to tell us that we can't do this?
But you can't.
You can't do before and after.
Yeah.
This pasuk. But we just weren't quoting it.
During.
During Shemitah, the one that it says over here, Sadecha lo tizra, right? The one the Gemara just said. Sharek kvar ne'emar, Sadecha lo tizra, v'karmecha lo tizmor, right?
So you're qualifying the before by the after?
We're qualifying the
The eighth year, there's a harvest.
the plowing. The plowing is for pre, and the harvesting is for post.
Okay, but you're allowed to. But you're allowed to plow. You're allowed to plow before. You said you're allowed.
After Shabbat.
No, that's what we're saying over here. Whatever period of time, we're not getting into what period of time, but before the seventh year Rosh Hashanah, I have a source that tells me that I can't do that. And where's that source? In the Torah. So you're telling me it's halacha l'Moshe Misinai, which means a pure oral law with no pasuk about it. I have it in a pasuk over here. Rabbi Akiva says we learn it from this pasuk. Why? Because everyone understand? The Torah tells me clearly many times that I can't plow and I can't harvest on the seventh year. Now I have another pasuk comes along and tells me completely unnecessarily, you can't plow and you can't harvest on Shemitah. It must be coming to tell me something I don't already know. So what do? We just widen now the window. Charish, plowing must mean something I didn't know yet. What is that? Before Shemitah. Harvesting must mean something I don't know already, which must mean after Shemitah. Okay? So, says the Gemara. That's the opinion. Rabbi Ishmael, that's the opinion of Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Ishmael says, no. Your whole question is flawed. You told me, Charishu bekatzir tishbot. You know why you told me it can't be talking about Shabbat? You know why you told me that? Because you said, if it's talking about Shabbat, there's 39 melachot you can't do. So it says, work on 6 days. On the 7th day, rest. And then it's telling you plowing and why those two things? Says Rabbi Ishmael, I have a hidush to apply in the laws of Shabbat. Okay? What's my hidush in Shabbat? Listen to this. Ma charish reshut, af katzir reshut. What the Torah was coming to tell you was something very, very clever. What charish, what plowing did we not allow? What harvesting did we not allow? Plowing in the Torah is never a mitzvah. There's no mitzvah ever in the Torah to plow. The Torah never says you must plow.
It says to work the land.
Doesn't say that you have to plow.
Wouldn't that fall under working?
No, and it doesn't say you have to work the land either.
Okay.
Right? There's no mitzvah. It says you're allowed to work it. It says you're allowed to work. It doesn't say you must. There is, however, a harvesting that you must do. There's one harvesting which is not up to you whether you want to do it or not. When is that? When must you harvest? The mitzvah of the Omer. Yatsa kitzira Omer shehi mitzvah. Kitzira Omer, cutting the barley for the Omer is a mitzvah. So what happens? You have to. What's the Omer? Omer was we would take the barley right when it grows. Okay, in the holiday of Pesach, at the end of Pesach, we would take the barley, we would cut it fresh, and then the next day, only barley that was cut the night before, they then bring it the next day fresh to the Bet HaMikdash, and they bring the Korban HaOmer. Okay? So you have, mitzvah. For that plowing. Now, when does it take place? One second, when does this take place? Pesach is one time over here, okay? The other side, right? The other side is Shavuot. On Pesach, we bring our korban is what's it called? From the Haitim, okay? And on Shavuot, on Pesach, it's a barley, and on Shavuot, it's shtei halechem. But that korban specifically has laws that other times you don't find. That there's an obligation of kitzir. Let me explain. Let's say you had barley that was already cut. Let's say somebody randomly cut the barley. The halakha would be that you'd have to cut barley again. Because it needs to be cut for this. So there's a real mitzvah in cutting the omer, the barley, for the sake of the korban ha'omer. Okay? Says Rabbi Ishmael, genius. You know what the Torah is telling you? It's telling you that on Shabbat, you're not allowed to do melacha. However, there's one exception. Charish and katzir. When katzir is like charish, when harvesting is like charish, it's asur. When it's done of your own free will, then it's asur. However, when there's an obligation to cut, you're allowed to cut on Shabbat. What happens if the day before the Korban HaOmer is Shabbat? What are you supposed to do? You have to cut it the night before. That's halakha. So normally you think, okay, fine. So then what would I do? I'll cut it Friday. No. The halakha is, where else do you find a similar idea? Brit Milah. You think, 8th day, okay, you know, Milah is asur. Milah, cutting, making a bleeding, a cut that's open and bleeds on Shabbat is asur. Why are you allowed to do Brit Milah on Shabbat? Because the Torah says specifically, Ubayom Hashemini, whatever day the 8th day is, you have to do Brit Milah. So the Torah over here says Rabbi Ishmael, you know why I told you these specific things? To tell you that the Harish and the Katsir are similar. The Harish is always up to you. So too, when cutting, harvesting is up to you, you're not allowed to do it. But there is a harvesting, which is not up to you. And that harvesting, permitted to do on Shabbat. Says the Gemara, okay? Now, turns out that Rabbi Akiva has a pasuk, right? So why do we need a halakha Moshe Misinai? And not only that, right? If it's halakha Moshe Sinai, right? Then we explained that's where we're getting from. But why are you calling it halakha Moshe Sinai? Now I have two pesukim, one pasuk, on halakha Moshe Sinai. Elam Rav Nachman. Rav Nachman says, okay. Elam Rav Nachman by Yitzchak. Rav Nachman by Yitzchak says. Now let me just explain 1 second. If I have a pasuk and I have a halakha Moshe Sinai, then I just messed up my whole Bet Shammai Bet Hillel thing. Remember, what did we do? We said, Bet Shammai Bet Hillel, what do you mean it's a halakha Moshe Sinai? No. Halakha Moshe Sinai is 30 days. Bet Shammai Bet Hillel is the extra bit that you didn't know. Pesach Shabuah. Says the Gemara, if I have a pasuk, then the pasuk is telling you the 30 days. So what's the halakha Moshe Sinai have to be telling you? Pesach Shabuot. Where does that leave Bet Hillel Bet Shammai? Nowhere. Good? And if that's the case, then our whole answer just fell off. Rabban Gamliel is not fighting Bet Shammai Bet Hillel. He's fighting a pasuk, or he's fighting halakha Moshe Sinai. Gemara says, Elam Rav Nachman Yitzchak. Rav Yitzchak says, Kig miri hilchata lemishrei yalda, kirai lemesa zikna. Says the Gemara. 1 second, no. Maybe let me show you how I could finesse it. Okay, the halakha Moshe Sinai is telling you you're allowed to Rosh Hashanah. The pasuk is telling you you're not allowed. The pasuk is saying what's forbidden. The halakha Moshe Sinai is coming to tell you what's mutar. So that's why you need both. And Bet Shammai Bet Hillel is the extra bit of Pesach Shavuot. The Gemara says, come on, I already answered. There you go, nailed it. Same thing at the end of the day. If the halakha Moshe Sinai tells you allowed, what do you automatically know? That if you didn't fulfill the condition, it's not allowed. The kivan de hilcheta lemishrei yalda. If the halakha Moshe Sinai is going to tell you that you're allowed to do it for the 10 young trees, lav memela zikna asira. Doesn't that automatically tell you that if you didn't fulfill the condition, then it's asur? So it doesn't make sense. Well, you're answering me that the pasuk came to tell you asur and the halakha came to tell you mutar. No, it doesn't make sense. Ella, says the Gemara, hilcheta Rabbi Ishmael, krai Rabbi Akiva. When we said before, that was halakha Moshe Sinai, and you asked me, what do you mean there's a pasuk? Rabbi Akiva says it's a pasuk. You already gave yourself the answer. Because it's only Rabbi Akiva that says it's a pasuk. What did Rabbi Ishmael do with the same words? He used it to tell you a law about Shabbat. So Rabbi Ishmael does not have the pasuk. So what's the answer? Halakha Moshe Sinai is the opinion of Rabbi Ishmael, who doesn't have this pasuk. The Karai, according to Rabbi Akiva, it's a pasuk in the Torah. Ela hilcheta Rabbi Ishmael, Kirai Rabbi Akiva. The pasuk is going to come according to Rabbi Akiva. Okay? Let's continue. Rabbi Yochanan Amar, Rabbi Yochanan says, no. Hold on. I have another approach, and that's going to be unbelievable.
Go to Uri's and you're done.
Sorry, don't even need the. Yeah, exactly. You don't need to plan nothing. The question is, what's Uri doing? Okay. Rabbi Yochanan says, 1 second. Rabbi Gamliel bet dino mideoraita batilu. They weren't coming from their own backs. Oh, we're going to undo the gezerah. They found a biblical reason to be able to attack this item. My ta'ama. What's their reasoning? Gamar Shabbat mi Shabbat Bereshit. In Shemitah, it calls Shemitah, the 7th year, it calls it Shabbat. Shabbat is also used as a terminology which refers to Shabbat Bereshit. Shabbat Bereshit means, what does it mean? It doesn't mean the Shabbat of creation. It means that in the creation, on the 7th day, God said, there is Shabbat. So the Shabbat that we're talking about, when we talk about Shabbat Bereshit, is the 7th day of the week. Why? Why do we need that delineation? Because a lot of the holidays are also called Shabbat, right? So which Shabbat do you mean? Shemitah also called Shabbat. So whenever you say Shabbat Bereshit, you're referring to the 7th day, which was made a day of rest already from the beginning of creation, okay? So the Gemara says, he learns Shabbat from Shabbat Bereshit. If Shemitah is called Shabbat, and the 7th day of the week is called Shabbat, Malhalan hi asura lefanea ulacharei mutarin, just like a regular Shabbat. Friday afternoon, can I do whatever the heck I want? Saturday night, can I go party? No problem. So before and after are legal. Only on the item is asur. So too Afkan, he asura. The 7th year is asur. Lifanea, before Rosh Hashanah, lacharea, before the second Rosh Hashanah, after the year is over, mutarin. No problems before the 7th year, no problems after the 8th year, and that is what the Gemara is answering. So according to this opinion, Rabbi Yochanan is saying he brought a pasuk, so therefore he's fighting with this halacha, the Moshe Sinai, or he's fighting with this pasuk from what? From his own pasuk. Gemara says, 1 second. Matkif la Rav Ashi, another 30 seconds. Mechila. Matkif la Rav Ashi. Rav Ashi says, I don't understand. Manda amar hilcheta. The guy who says it's halacha Moshe Sinai. Atya gzera shava akra hilcheta. You think you can make up your own gzera shava? Your own Shabbat law? Rabban Gamliel? Make it up when your Beit Din comes into power and uproot a halacha? Umanda amar kra. The other opinion, Rabbi Akiva, that says the pasuk. Atya gzera shava. You can make up Shabbat gzera shava and say it's going to undo the kra, the pasuk of Rabbi Akiva. For sure, you can't do that. Rabbi Akiva, if Rabban Gamliel and his Beit Din received it from before, fine. But if you said that Rabban Gamliel and his Beit Din came to this decision, they can't make up a gzera shava and undo a pasuk. Gemara says, Rav Ashi says, no. Rabban Gamliel Betino, Sarvi like Rabbi Ishmael, they hold like Rabbi Ishmael. That the idea is halacha Moshe Sinai. And when was the halacha taught? Only when the Beit HaMikdash was in existence. Just like Nisuch Hamayim. Remember, what were the 3 things that the halacha Moshe Sinai said? 10 trees, Aravot, and Nisuch Hamayim, pouring of the water. The second 2, when are they relevant?
Only in the Beit HaMikdash.
Only in the Beit HaMikdash. So it makes sense then that the third one is not just randomly its own category, the odd one out. The same way that those 2 were only about the time of the Beit HaMikdash, so too were the 10-tree law, i.e., pre-Shemitah, Isurim, relevant before during the time of Beit HaMikdash. But now Rabban Gamliel says, like I told you, he lived in the time after the destruction of the temple. Rabban Gamliel said that law never was in force for non-Beit HaMikdash times. Law. The time the Beit HaMikdash was destroyed, that does not appear. Okay, I just want to point out, we're done. I just want to point out, just very important. According to this last opinion, Rabban Gamliel and his Beit Din are not only undoing the 6-month item, but leaving the 30-day item. Because remember, we differentiated. We said the 30-day item, halacha Moshe Sinai. The other bit, Bet Shammai Bet Hillel, that they could argue with. So in that answer, the Gemara, Rabban Gamliel and his Beit Din were only nullifying the Pesach Atzeret item. But they couldn't touch the 30-day item because that was halacha Moshe Sinai. According to this answer, Rabban Gamliel and his Beit Din are telling you that the halacha Moshe Sinai was only ever for Bet Shammai, was Bet HaMikdash Kayam. So now they're undoing not only that, but they're also undoing 30 days, which means that during our day, now in our time, you're able to plant, plow, whatever you want until Rosh Hashanah. And afterwards, also starting right afterwards, not Shemitah.
Including 30 days. Within the 30 days.
Including 30 days out the window.
Inside the 30 days.
Even inside
Up to the day.
up to the day of Rosh Hashanah.
That's
what we
fine.
said.
That's who you give your money
2
to.
weeks ago we said that.
We had to get here. We had to explain.
Why not just do before?